Want your brand to be seen and be remembered? Effective campaigns need both. JC&Co's high-quality billboard sites in premium locations nationwide offer brands powerful and visible stages for emotive, impactful and influential storytelling. Find out how JC&Co can help your brand be seen and be remembered at www.beseenberemembered.co.nz. Nau mai, hoki mai, kia The Fold, e mihi ne, ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. My guest today is Nick Becker, who is the CEO of Auckland FC. So this is one of these kind of occasional, slightly tangential episodes of The Fold, and I have to confess, as a guy who loves sports and the business of sports, this probably veers into that lane a little bit, but we're also trying to talk about the media side of things too. Around distribution, platforms, how you build an audience from scratch and a culture from scratch, and how that interacts with media where there are, limited spots and you're trying to fight your way into it. Nick's had this fascinating career, starting client side at O2 in the UK and then moving to first Arsenal and then Manchester City, before kind of leaving the bright lights for a much different job at Melbourne City in Melbourne, before ultimately taking the Auckland FC job. And there's, so we just talk, and he's, I sort of know him off mic as well, and he's just a really smart, curious, open thinker about the sort of mechanics of building out a team and of how that interacts with audience and how that's changed from the sort of the era that he came up in sports, the sort of late 2000s and 2010s to the very different environment that we have now. So it's very much on the sports topic, but I think it has relevance for anyone who's trying to reach an audience in this era where there's just so much that has changed so radically, and there's a lot of different ways you can understand it. And I think Nick's one of the smartest people out there in terms of thinking about that. So this is Nick Becker, CEO of Auckland FC, on The Fold. Tēnā koe, Nick. Welcome to The Fold.
Thank you for having me, Duncan.
Really excited to do this. It's not going to be out, I think, for another month or two. Sure. So I've seen the first episode of the new documentary, and just excited to talk like weird, nerdy sports media stuff with you.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could start, like, your career in football began in the relative backwater that is the English Premier League.
A few people have heard about it, but
yeah. Tell me what it was like to, as a New Zealander, to sort of slide into the machine of professional sports at that incredibly exultant level.
Yeah, I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate in that, in many ways, right place, right time, but sort of have also worked incredibly hard to get to where I am. But I went over to the UK in 2003, left Auckland. I was sort of over there to seek fame and fortune, as many Kiwis do on that pilgrimage. And I, when I first got there, I started working in an agency, and one of our clients was O2, the telco. They offered me a job. I worked in their brand team, and they brought me in. My background had been music up to that point. But when I arrived in London, I quickly worked out that if I wanted to fit in, I was a single man there. If I wanted to kind of have some chat at the pub, I needed to get into football, right? So when I joined O2, they sponsored Arsenal and also England Rugby as well. And I quickly kind of pivoted from music into sport. And the team that I sat in, which was a sort of event and sponsorship team, and started working with Arsenal as a rights buyer, so as a sponsor of the club. Was heavily involved in them when they moved to the Emirates, and O2 had just come off the front of the shirt, and they'd moved in, and I kind of started to learn the whole piece around. It was really around fan experience and kind of learning that kind of journey of what it is to actually connect a club, a brand, and a fan together, and sort of how you can kind of make the most out of that. So that was really fortunate. I had a great time there. And it was through that connection that I got a little tap on the shoulder to go up to Manchester when the Manchester sort of, I guess, latest revolution had just taken place. So Abu Dhabi had come in and purchased the club.
This is City, yeah.
This is, Man City, yep. And they had invested a significant amount of money into the club, in terms of players, but also in terms of infrastructure, what they did around the stadium, how they wanted to kind of present themselves as a club. And that was where my I guess, football journey properly started, and that was a really exciting time to be there.
I'm sort of thinking about this as 2000s, mid-late 2000s kind of thing, which was the sort of the last time where the sort of the tabloids and the kind of traditional kind of machine of media was at the sort of height of its powers, and football clubs, and particularly those kind of marquee clubs, and ones which are sort of radically changing their destiny, are obviously subject to like kind of insane levels of scrutiny.
Yeah.
How did the club sort of manage that? What are your sort of memories of that interaction?
I was really fortunate to have worked quite closely with the Chief Communications Officer at Manchester City is a woman called Vicky Kloss, or she was. She's since left now, but she was an absolute machine and amazing at her job. She had a really good team underneath her. A guy called Simon Heggie dealt directly with the media. A wonderful woman called Damaris Treasure, who's now my wife, who was there as well. Yeah, hell of a woman. And so I actually saw them operate, and they were a first class team, and really impressive how they did. And when I got there, the manager was a guy called Roberto Mancini, and Roberto was Italian. He was a successful. Like I arrived in 11-12. They won the league for the first time. Roberto was at the helm. He was a handful for the media team to deal with. He was the sort of guy who he would. This is apparently, so Roberto, if you're listening, I'm sorry for telling this story. He would come off if it had been raining, which it did often in Manchester. He'd come off, blow dry his hair before he'd stand in front of the media again. And sometimes if it had been a bad result on the pitch, he'd refuse to come out from his office where his blow dryer and said blow dryer and comb were. So they had to negotiate. You're right, incredibly sort of hostile media environment, because everyone was just looking for a headline, as a kind of like a classic, like sort of Daily Mail play now. There's only a few of them left, but at the time, so you had to be really careful about who. It was a very well managed machine. Whereas I think now, certainly what we've tried to set up in Auckland, we're a lot more open, we're a lot more transparent, we're a lot more kind of accepting in. We also are conscious that you're probably very close to being cancelled at that point too, if you are so open and not so bad. But I do believe that watching that sort of like highly managed situation, you never, the real story doesn't come across. And I think the sort of like where sport is now, and certainly in a smaller sport and one that's sort of growing, you need to be open, you need to be kind of more transparent. Yeah,
and I think it's also, the function of doing that doesn't exist in the same way. Like if you achieve it, to what end, is how it feels.
Yeah.
So from there you moved to Melbourne, and you go from being one of the biggest clubs in the country and the most popular sport, the biggest leagues in the world too. I was trying to figure out where football would rank for that city. You got AFL, NRL, cricket for sure.
Yeah.
Rugby, I don't know. It's hard to tell how popular rugby is in Australia.
It was, in Melbourne. So it's a really.
But you're not number one.
No,
it
certainly wasn't, and it was really hard. And it was kind of like they kept asking me when I was in Manchester and I had an amazing, like it was 5 years there. It was incredible, and sort of to your point, being right at the top of the sort of pyramid of football in the greatest league in the world was an incredible experience to be. And they kept saying to me, we've just bought a club in Melbourne. Do you want to come down and help run it? And I was like, have I done something wrong here? What's going on? And it took me about a year of resisting. And in that time, I kind of was part of what was happening at Manchester City was they were starting to acquire clubs and launch clubs around the world. I helped launch New York City into the MLS, announced the license there. And then I realised the vision, I saw what they were trying to do, and Melbourne was a sort of opportunity for me to come out and actually see how a full football club ran and operated. In Manchester, I was still very much in a pretty kind of like sort of clear silo. I didn't get to see anything that happened in the football side of things, etc. out here, when I went to Melbourne, it was an opportunity to see the whole operation. So yeah, I came out and I came out with we flew out with Manchester City was actually playing Real Madrid and Roma in a tournament called the ICC tournament at the MCG, and we flew out for that just to sort of do a little bit of a recce on Melbourne. We were moving out there, Damaris and I, to kind of find a house, meet the team in Melbourne and so forth. And we turned up with the Manchester team. It was actually, we just signed Raheem Sterling, and we flew Raheem out to meet up with the rest of the team. So that was kind of a bizarre way to enter into Australia. And we turned up and we had this match against Real Madrid at the MCG. It was 100,000 people there. It was sold out. And I was sitting there going, this is going to be easy, right? And then, of course, I got to find for the first season of A-League at Melbourne City, which is a smaller team to Melbourne Victory. And to your point, football sits about fifth in the sort of popularity of sports. I don't know if there's many per capita cities in the world that are as competitive as Melbourne. And it was a real awakening. It was a real kind of like, okay, there's a lot we have to do there. And the approach that we took at Melbourne City was very much about be the best, get the best players on, win, and that will grow the club. What we failed to do, and I think what we've worked really hard to do here in Auckland, was to drive that connection with the community and actually embed ourselves into the city of Melbourne, just because there was so much else going on. And just because Melbourne Victory had been there for so much longer and was so much more successful, we found it really hard to make those roads in. And instead of working even harder at doing that, we didn't, and I think it was there was a real struggle, but a real lesson and a learning for me when I was there. Yeah,
I'm kind of curious to pick up on sort of some of what, how you get to kind of, when you're building something from scratch, you get a different, you get to take those lessons and you don't have any kind of calcified build-up of how things were done or how people perceive you. A lot of challenges with it too. Yeah. Before then, though, the sort of news came out, I think, earlier this week that the stadium bid, which I know the club wasn't sort of formally associated with, but would have obviously had a big impact on it, and was backed by people associated with the club, has been withdrawn. Why?
Great question. Genuinely, I think there was just a huge level of frustration with the process, and I think ultimately there was an excitement and an eagerness to do that and to commit to it, and certainly everyone who I've spoken to on our side were very committed and very keen to kind of see it as a huge opportunity, both for Auckland, for the club, for football in the city, but the process got drawn out. The kind of politics that surrounded it became quite kind of messy. The kind of the whole Speedway piece, the other bid, Ponsonby Rugby, obviously not happy about it. It all just became too difficult. I think is the long and short of it. I literally do. I think they're the type of people who are keen to do something. If it becomes too difficult, they look for something else and they move on.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the story of Auckland Stadia is bright ideas, beautiful concept drawings, eventually sort of dying on
Nothing
the vine.
Happens. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get onto it in a bit, but one of the hardest things for me when we came back here to start up the club was actually facilities and finding something. And I think Auckland is behind, if it wants to be a major city, if it wants to kind of compete on a global level, it has to have a really clear strategy. And I think this is an actual opportunity to actually take a step back and go, right, let's build a plan, let's have a clear plan. I left in 2003, they were talking about a downtown stadium. And literally, I returned 20 years later and they're still talking about it. And it's just, you pull your hair out in frustration. But it's not just the national stadium or the 60,000 or 25, whatever it might be. High performance centres and, public facilities, we lag so far behind. And I understand it's a population and kind of wealth thing, but we're so far behind Australia on actual facilities, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and there's also a coherence thing because and obviously there's a tension in some ways because music was one of the other bidders, but you could say the same thing about our kind of music facilities as well. And if you go to Melbourne, is such a classic example, the way they've got that precinct set up around Rod Laver and the MCG and so on. And it is a frustration that the vision grinds itself to dust against the inertia of what we have, and so we got this kind of weird collection of orphan stadiums and still can't play Test cricket here.
Yeah, I know, right. And it's not impossible to do. I mean, look, Christchurch seem to be doing quite well at building their new stadium. So
just no, let's not say that. So I just yesterday watched episode 1 of the docuseries, which is quite cool because it takes you back to the beginnings of this. Firstly, what made you comfortable with taking this approach, in terms of letting someone in when you've got quite a lot on your plate already in terms of building a club from scratch?
There's only you only get one chance at doing something for the first time, right? Like that's a very simple and obvious thing to say, but the being able to, we got approached by Julie, who produced it, obviously, and she's a fantastic woman, really kind of passionate about what she does and good at her job, right? And so when she sat down and talked to us about actually, she'd like to get right in and behind the open doors. If you look at how it's actually been done successfully on a global scale, like Wrexham has obviously done really well, Sunderland to an extent.
That's great. I could probably prefer that because
compelling,
it's so,
right?
Yeah, well, it's heart wrenching, but they don't flinch.
Yeah, exactly. And so it gave us the opportunity to go, okay, look, Auckland hasn't had a professional team in 17 years. For me, coming back here and being part of a team and it's been my sort of the town that I grew up in, it's a huge honour to do it and a real privilege. And I kind of selfishly wanted to have someone capturing it as well. And then sort of to my point earlier, it's like you actually want to have a fully open and transparent piece. Now we're growing the sport. We want to show the people who our players are. Nobody knows a young Auckland footballer. But if you put a camera in front of them and their personality comes across, people are going to find out and they're going to start to kind of like follow the team through off the back of it. I mean, the sort of, everybody talks about the success of Drive to Survive. There is something in that in terms of, for us, football in Auckland hasn't really been, it's been pretty absent for so long. What are the things that are going to kickstart it? And I think a documentary is one of those.
It's interesting, right? Because we haven't done a lot of this kind of thing in New Zealand, but we were, ironically, quite early on it in terms of the All Blacks did a big series with Amazon Prime, which is widely considered, to the extent it's considered at all, that it failed because it was really boring because they didn't really open up. So that they were right on the subject but wrong on, it was an example of the overmanaged media era. How did you sort of, I mean, you must have been aware of that tension and, first episodes of anything are always difficult, but there's some things in it, whether it's the kind of, I think especially as you build to opening day, you start to kind of you're just seeing things that are a bit behind the curtain. A lot of eggs content, a lot of
eggs. You like it?
I really enjoyed the eggs content. Danny Hay bagging out New Zealand football in a way that's not particularly politic. How did you sort of manage that kind of tension between we want to present a particular face, but it also must be entertaining and feel authentic?
To be honest, the biggest concern I had was the amount of swearing. Seriously,
family show.
There is. We do have a large family audience, and I didn't want there were two things that kind of slightly ground me was the mouth, like sort of Steve's potty mouth, and also like the general coaching staff giving the refs a bit of grief. And I think if you would take those two things, but the reality is they're super passionate people. That's what they're doing. If you're coming onto our games and you're sitting anywhere near them, you're seeing it anyway.
Totally.
So why are you going to try and sort of cover that up? We may as well be completely open and transparent to who we are and honest and authentic to who we are, right? And I think there is a kind of like a huge amount of stress and a huge amount of pressure for in professional sport anyway, regardless of the fact. Then you add on the fact that we were starting up for our first season, building into our first ever game, and at a point where I didn't know how we were going to go in our first game. I thought, our preseason games were pretty terrible, to be honest. I was like,
it all gets washed away.
Who knows how this is going to work out? And so you wanted to have that kind of, you want to feel that drama, you want to have that in there. If you don't have it, there's no point. It becomes another sort of just another documentary about a sports team on a shelf.
The JC Billboard Network delivers quality reach via commanding sites to ensure your campaign is visible and impactful. With superior screen quality and premium locations, JC can help your campaign be seen and be remembered. Visit www.beseenberemembered.co.nz to learn more. The most affecting scene in it is when the port sort of walk down for the first time, and you can see, and it's palpable from the players and management, that this thing feels like it's not wholly theirs, that it's starting to be made in front of their eyes, and obviously then the football has to do its part too. But, we talked earlier about that sort of fan engagement and kind of, that's what English football does so well. Like these things feel like partnerships between the fans and the clubs. But that, with the exception of the Warriors, I don't think that's necessarily all that well done here. It feels a bit more command and control. How do you go about engendering that? Because it sort of feels like it needs to be organic, but you've got to sort of almost give a permission or find people and say to them, like, this is welcome.
Yeah, it's I think there's a couple of bits to it from our side. Like, I often get asked whether we created the port, and we didn't at all. Like, they created themselves, and we just sat with them in a room and said, how can we help you guys grow? So that was a kind of like, and they've been phenomenal for us, and they're a huge part of the club, and they always will be. But if you, right at the start, when I first started talking to Bill Foley about setting up the club and talking to him about sort of, asking him how they did in Vegas and sort of what his vision for it was, the first thing he said to me right at the beginning was, you need to be able to connect to the community, and you need to be able to embed yourself into Auckland as a city, and not just with the football community, but as a whole. And so, sort of set your plan around how you're going to do that. And that's something that they did really well in Vegas. They literally took ice hockey to the desert and made it a kind of a product which the people from Vegas love. It's not the people who go to the Vegas Golden Knights to watch an ice hockey game there. 80-90% of them live in Vegas. They're from Las Vegas. They've moved to Las Vegas. They're not, pardon me, they're not, bucks parties or tourists who are there. They're actually the people of, and they're really proud of their team. And that's what we wanted to create here in Auckland. So I think that was we talked about that, the whole team and everybody who joined, including the players. We sat them down and told them that was a key part of who we are as a club and what we're doing year one and beyond, to be honest. And then we had this sort of like this perfect storm of the growth of football here and in a youth capacity, like the number of kids playing. You've got over 60,000 registered. There's more than 18 clubs across Auckland that have over 1,500 kids playing there. Some up to 3,000 at Western Springs. So we kind of connected with those clubs as well, and you had this really sort of fantastic support from families. We had an amazing kickoff time at 5 p.m. on a Saturday that worked for everybody. And then the kind of the actual genuine connection between the players and the fans started pre-season wherever we went, and we went to a lot of clubs. We visited a lot of clubs, we visited a lot of schools, we visited and then when we played our pre-season games, the players stayed and chatted to the fans, and that connection started to build with the guys in the port. We've got a bar down in Britomart called the Tyler Street, and so we'd have events there where the players met with the fans, and they started to kind of and those would grow, and more people would come to each one every month, and so all this sort of positivity between the players and this sort of connection and emotional connection started to happen, and then when we started playing our games, we won our first 6 games. 4 of them were
quite helpful.
Yeah, it was really helpful, right? And so you had potential fans of the club come along, and they sort of had a connection with the game because they saw a win, might have been a last-minute goal. They stayed behind. The players stayed out on the pitch for an hour and met them, did a selfie, or they saw if they weren't in the port, they saw the atmosphere and everything that the guys from the port brought to the game. And they started to think, this is something that we've either missed because we're an expat from the UK and we used to love it back in the day, or they were new to it and they thought, this is amazing, this is like nothing else in New Zealand sport that we've experienced. And it just sort of started to kind of, sort of start to gather momentum from there.
So, you mentioned sort of the fact that football had been absent from the city, and as a country and a city, the sort of thing that you grow up understanding without even really questioning it's air, it's water, is that this is a town that likes rugby in winter and cricket in summer, and there is a sort of strict hierarchy. I was thinking, like, that in prepping for this, that just doesn't feel like as baked in as it once did. How do you what's your view of the sort of hierarchy of sports and how immutable it is in this era versus the one that you and I potentially grew up in?
Yeah, I think one thing for sure is I'm very happy we play in summer. I think that does make a huge difference. Like if we were trying to take on rugby, the Warriors.
The Warriors feel like a bigger team for this city than the Blues do as well, which is
100%.
says that things can move.
Yeah, but then if you look across media now, it's still like like the All Blacks at the moment. Just every day there's 2 or 3 stories where that doesn't happen. We still have to fight for a couple of stories, a week, and as we lead up to our game. So there is that there's still that sort of massive. Everyone is behind. New Zealand is a rugby country, right? Where it's fallen off is they've fallen out of love with Super Rugby. There's definitely been a shift in kids playing football over rugby. That's without a doubt.
So your pipe looks different.
Exactly. But the sort of, I think there's in Auckland now, and I think sometimes you take a very kind of, we live in Ponsonby. There's the big clubs are all surrounded around us, and you think, God, everybody plays football, but it's not true. Anywhere throughout South Auckland, West Auckland, there's still rugby league are the dominant sports there. So there is a little bit of taking a balanced view onto it, but the fact that we play across summer means that we actually have a 12 months of football. We get the club football through the winter, that we get to connect with that audience and work closely with them and have our reserve teams play and sort of have a constant presence there. And then the team plays across the summer and people can come. They come on a Saturday and at 5 p.m. It's nice, it's warm, it's something different. It's an experience that you can take the whole family to. It's difficult to take the family to a 7:30 p.m. game on a Friday night in the middle of winter, whereas it's quite easy to take them all along to go media on a Saturday afternoon. So
you mentioned that sort of thing of fighting to get stories, and there's also a quite poignant, I think, scene in the documentary where Andrew Gordy is presenting. He's talking about this new Auckland FC team, and for News Hub, which by the time you launched didn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So you've got the media environment that you're launching into is constrained, shrinking, and you're trying to build a presence there. How have you found that sort of from scratch, working with that sort of traditional side of the media?
I think we've been really lucky because we've got high profile owners. When we first we announced the name, so people were really interested in that. Then there was a sort of succession of kind of announcements around some players with like sort of Hiroki coming in early doors and him being a high profile player. New owners coming in like Tim Brown, Winston Reid, Stephen Adams, who they grabbed headlines. We also stayed within the stadium debate because that had jumped into the mix as well, and we just kind of threw our names in there just to stay as part of the conversation. And that early on, that is before this, we're talking pre-Western Springs, just to clarify.
Sure. Yeah.
And so our relationship with the media has always been really positive. It has been really good. But what I meant before in my comment about the rugby is that we don't have that kind of natural sort of people just want to write stories about 4 or 5 of our players, every week in and week out. We have to really pitch them, and we have to sort of work really hard at it. I think it helps, and one of the reasons why we do the documentary is it creates those personalities that the media then kind of start to kind of latch onto and want to kind of talk to and develop. That sort of groundwork that's been done for decades with rugby just doesn't exist for us, and so we're having to do all that work now.
Your rights situation, your play on Sky,
Yep.
Which is not unconventional, but both cricket and rugby in different ways and for different reasons have been sort of straining at that, and both have kind of weird rights situations, and that
Yep.
rugby still hasn't announced a new deal
Yeah.
for next year.
Yep.
I gather it's very, very imminent now, but they were actively trying to get back on one of the 2 big free-to-air channels.
Yep.
Cricket, the Black Caps are playing in Zimbabwe now, which is on 3 now, which I think maybe it's 5th different platform for that one team. How do you think about the sort of accessibility versus financial return versus how do we want this thing to be presented to an audience, like the complexity of that in amongst everything else you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole broadcast environment is in a sort of like a quite tightly managed change. I think there is going to be, for us, look, the way that it's structured for us is Sky, fantastic broadcast partner here. They just do the New Zealand teams. The broadcast revenue that we receive comes from the Australian deal, and that Australian deal, which was signed 4 years ago, isn't a great deal. Like that one over there in Australia. I want to clarify this, because the last time I had this conversation, Sky were calling me up going, "Why'd you call us our deal the worst deal?" I'm like, "No, it's not the Sky one. It's the one in Australia." And that's
a bit hard, right? Because you don't really influence that, and you might be an outsized drawer.
Exactly.
But you don't necessarily have the ability to turn that into a equitable share of revenue based on what you're putting in.
Well, we do, because we're one of it's shared equally across the league, but we don't have any control over the conversation that's taking place.
But are you generating equal interest across the league?
I think if anything, we're skewing above.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, that's what, exactly.
So if it were on, it's just like the Lakers are, subsidizing the Utah Jazz kind of.
Yeah. So I have got the numbers there, and we definitely are. We're pumping up the numbers across broadcast attendance, a whole range of things on the league. I think there is that's our year 1. Year 2, I want to see that kind of continue to grow, because that's an important metric, right? Like, we had a fantastic year 1. We moved all those metrics higher. We need to be able to maintain that and continue to grow that. Then we really can kind of force our way into the conversation and make sure that the sort of pieces. But the biggest concern for me is that the broadcast deal is happening right now for the next round, and who knows where it's going to land. Like it is such a
soft market for sports rights.
Totally soft market.
Yeah. What about that sort of free-to-air side, the accessibility side? Do you feel like you get enough distribution in the local environment?
Well, we do. We're on Sky Open, so there's a game of ours each week, either ourselves or Wellington are on Sky Open. So that's a really important part of the deal, and Sky are really good at promoting that. So I think for us that kind of works. It's really tricky. When we first came into the market, Sky obviously hadn't re-signed the A-League. We were looking around at other options. And there's no clear model where you go, this is the perfect solution. It just doesn't exist anymore. Until, I think, like you look abroad at different markets and what's happened there, and when a big streamer comes in and kind of disrupts the whole piece, that's when it becomes interesting for the rights holders. But I can't see that. With the size of the audience here, you can't see that happening for quite a while. And you look at the rugby being the case in point in that sense too.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of speaking of rugby, they tried this, or at least head faked maybe at trying it, but at least wanted to build an audience and a potential for a direct-to-consumer product play. You do see that with a lot of football clubs internationally, and that you could buy a sort of an Arsenal type pass where you get those games online. A bunch of other, some of that's a function of scale, obviously. But outside of sort of season tickets, have you got plans, or what does the sort of direct to fan piece look like?
So just to I guess take a bit of the sort of myth of those being successful away. It's like, like
they exist. I'm not sure
they exist, but they're massive loss leaders. Like, Man City had it. I think there's out of all the Premier League clubs, I'm not sure there's any of those who have a direct consumer model that works, because fans just want live matches, and that's what the broadcaster is going to pay for. And then if you start to create your kind of NZR pluses and all that sort of stuff, it's a hungry beast that you have to feed on a daily basis. And there's other platforms. I don't know if you've heard of YouTube and others out there that who do it and do it really well. And like, you kind of look to monetize it through existing platforms. It is kind of you are sort of giving away a fair bit of your IP or revenue, but it's going to reach a much larger audience. And I can't see how that model works until the clubs own their own live content, and then they can sell it that way. But you look at France has had a disaster. They were going to go direct to consumer, and they've had a shocker. It works kind of. There's products like NBA Pass and things like that do actually work. There's not many out there that are successful.
So, in terms of year one was near perfect. And that's probably to the good, circling back to the documentary, and that if you'd won everything, it would have been boring for reasons beyond your control.
Yeah.
In some respects, albeit very emotional. How do you? But broadly speaking, it's hard to grade the first season as anything but A+ in terms of all of the different kind of metrics. The record season, the LP that I went to the launch of.
Yeah.
As you sort of build through your first real off season, how do you sort of start to think about building and into the next thing and not backsliding, which it's not common to do what you did, but it's also much rarer still to sustain it. Yeah,
no, absolutely. We really, really wanted to be in that grand final. We wanted to win it. We wanted to be the first team in the A-League to ever do that, and kind of been an elite number of teams that globally have done that in their first year. We're incredibly kind of proud of and feel very lucky to have won our first bit of silverware and be the first New Zealand team to win some A-League silverware in our first season. So that was a great achievement. But what it did give us on the pitch is actually something to strive for next season. We want to go that step further. So that is a bit of motivation for the boys. So there was a kind of once you took the moment, and it took about a week of, it felt like grief, that we hadn't made it. And it was this kind of really weird scenario where we lost the semi-final, and all of our plans that we had for the next week just totally went up in dust, and suddenly there's like the phone stopped ringing and there's nothing to do.
It felt so strange, like it was like this. No one had imagined that could possibly happen.
I was walking around aimlessly for a week. It was just really disappointing. But then once you get over that and you start to think about actually how successful the season was and the records we broke, and we're all really proud of it. It was a very special season. But now, to your point, we're looking to kind of move it forward. And I've been having these conversations with my team over the last couple of days. It's actually like, let's look across at what we've done well. Because we were in our first year, there was so many things that we threw together, and there's so many kind of little bits that we can improve anyway. But actually, what are the 2 or 3 big things that we're going to focus on that will take us on next season? We'll make sure our match day experience is more exciting and more engaging. We now really have a really good understanding of who our fan base are and how little different segments that are in there, and how can we actually work really closely with them and do a couple of things that make their experience that much better. And so that's kind of our kind of job for the next couple of months and what our focus is. And it makes it exciting, right? It's actually like, rather than looking like this dreaded, like, how are we going to go better? It's like, actually, this is a really exciting thing. People are behind us. The city's behind us. Let's get the rest of the city along to our games. We had 260,000 people through the gate last season. Let's get it to 300,000. Let's kind of continue to do that. And then, the kind of people get the team are pretty pumped about it. They're very excited.
Well, I'm really pleased to have had you up in the period of relative calm before the storm comes again. But I will let you get back to the demands of your job. Thanks, Nick, so much for coming on the Fold today.
Thank you, Duncan. Pleasure.
Seeing is not enough. With optimized data tools and insights, the JC2Co Billboard Network helps brands be remembered. Dedicated to closing the loop between impression and action, JC2Co can help your campaign be seen and be remembered. Visit www.beseenberemembered.co.nz to learn more.